Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and look who's back at the perfect time. Sam Monson, Check the Mic podcast with Sam and Steve Palazzolo, which when you do the old Spotify Wrapped, guess what comes out to my number one most listened to podcast of the year? Indeed, it was Check the Mic every week with the previews, the reviews of each week of the season. You keep me informed about everything around the NFL. Well, I am in a cone of focus on the Minnesota Vikings, Sam. So I'm glad that the Check the Mic podcast is rolling with you and Steve. And I'm hoping you're having a fun season. How we doing, man?
Yeah, it's doing good. And, a big thank you to you for being so encouraging and helpful along the process as we were, exploring going out on our own. That was definitely a big help. It was fun, the Spotify rap thing this year, because we left sort of around mid-August, so we had a lot of people that were sending us these Spotify raps where it was us, Check the Mic, and then us as the PFF NFL podcast as well. And we were like 1 and 2 on their Spotify rap. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think that actually was the case for me because I like to jog and throw it in, especially after a Sunday. So the Monday night jog is pretty much your entire show. Although sometimes I don't make it through 2.5
A long
hours
jog.
of Sam and Steve. Yeah, I was gonna say, but it's a substantial jog. So anyway, look, this is the game of the year for the Vikings. This is the game of the last many years for the Minnesota Vikings, I think. So start me off with when you and Steve are previewing this one, which you may have already done just before we recorded this. What's your number one storyline going into Vikings Packers?
I think the opportunity there for the Vikings, really. I mean, they've been so good this season. I mean, completely a surprise package in terms of what our expectations, certainly mine were before the season. We expected this team to be pretty good, but just treading water once they lost JJ McCarthy, once they were sort of tied to Sam Darnold for the entire season. But Kevin O'Connell has done it again. I mean, his ability to change a quarterback, he did it with Kirk Cousins, and he's rewired Sam Darnold. And now Darnold isn't just playing well for Sam Darnold, he's playing well, period. Maybe not quite at the sort of MVP caliber of Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, but like the next tier down. I mean, he's in that group of really, really impressive performance, Pro Bowl type of caliber, if that term has any meaning anymore. And the Vikings are really good because of it. And they're obviously keeping pace and still right in line for that number one overall seed competition. And now they have, maybe the two toughest games of their entire season to end the season. So on the one hand, it's like that's a brutal way to finish your year. On the other hand, this is your opportunity. You go and beat two division rivals who are also chasing 13 wins in the season. If you're able to beat one or both of those teams, you could go into the postseason as the number one seed with the week off, on the wild card weekend, with everything having to come through Minnesota and, Detroit dealing with a really banged up defense, with Philadelphia having sort of thrown away the opportunity to get that number one seed and, looking like the team to beat.
Give me more context in the bigger picture of Sam Darnold for this season. Just you don't have to say where he ranks for you exactly. We don't have to rank quarterbacks. We'll save that for July content. But as I was going through and I wrote about this today, looking at the elite quarterbacks in the league over the last couple of years, I don't think that Sam Darnold is quite on the level of Lamar Jackson, who is putting up a historic season. I don't think it's quite Josh Allen because of his running ability and his ability to avoid sacks. But if you give me almost anybody else in the NFL and stack up where he is, adjusted net yards per attempt, quarterback rating, PFF grade, big time throw percentage, even his turnover worthy play throw percentage has dropped and dropped, just to use all the PFF stats we can get our hands on. And in a year and a world that is throwing the ball shorter and shorter, ADOTs are going down, Sam Darnold is pushing the ball down the field as well as any quarterback that we've seen over the last, 5 years in the NFL since everybody started going to two high shells. So how would you compare him kind of across the league for what he has done this year?
Yeah, and bouncing back from adversity as well. Like anytime anything does go wrong, it's not like he's been perfect this season. You know, everybody has a bad game here or there, or something bad happens within the game. He's consistently demonstrated the ability to bounce back from those, have a good performance following a bad performance, or rectify a bad play or a bad opportunity with something later in the game. You know, the Seahawks game, the fourth quarter, all of a sudden, Seattle's defense is really turning up the pressure. They're getting home. I don't want to say they got lucky. It was a face mask call, right? And they missed one of those earlier in the season, so it's not like they were riding their luck. But you sort of get a do over on that play where the pressure did get home, and a guy just used the face mask to make the tackle, and he takes advantage of that by then hitting a touchdown and being essentially the game winner. So Darnold, the kind of the non-statistical stuff, the more ancillary stuff has been really impressive as well. Yeah, look, there was a brief glimmer of time where I think he was forcing himself into the fringes of the MVP conversation. And really, that pretty much sums it up. I don't think he should be there. Like, I think that is the purview of, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. Maybe you want to put Joe Burrow in there, depending on what you want to do with wins as a concept for the MVP. But he is the next step down. Like after that, if you clear those three guys that are the MVP conversation, who would the next quarterback that you bring up be? And it would be Darnold. It would be Jared Goff. It would be people like that. So that from where he came from, from his sort of career baseline up until this point is an insane turnaround. I mean, I don't want to say it's unprecedented because I don't think it quite is, but it's extremely unusual and extremely unlikely for a thing to happen.
So what is your explanation for it? Because I think the explanation is about 7 or 8 tiers or layers of things that
Right.
have all played into it. The number one thing is that he's a really talented football player and stupid talented after I've gotten to see him up front, up close and personal. I mean, even during training camp, I remember you and I talked about expectations for this season. And I think we did this in Vegas at Circa, right?
Yeah.
And we were talking about how you were calling it, hey, maybe it's a mulligan season and we're just giving everybody a free pass until next year. And I was like, the one thing that holds me back is how just insane this guy's arm is throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson. And that's what's really driven this offense for the entire year. What's number 2 for you? Because clearly the draft status means something, the size, the athleticism, the arm strength. What is this? What is the second layer down for why Sam Darnold has surprised the entire NFL this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think number 2 probably is Kevin O'Connell, and you might even make that number 1. The job he's done has been incredible. I think at that Circa conversation, we were talking about how there might be pressure on Kevin O'Connell if this season went badly. Like it wouldn't be his fault. He's lost the quarterback that presumably he was going to be starting, if not right away, then very early in the season. And you're like, but that's the way the NFL is, right? If it's a bad season, he will be under pressure. And instead, he's like, no, I'll just take Sam Darnold and fix him just immediately, like a project, right? I'm just going to take this guy that had been a bust, that hadn't worked out in, multiple different spots, and just fix him and just rewire him and get the most out of him and remind people why he was a top overall quarterback. And actually not just that, but remind them verbally as well. Like come out and say, organizations fail players more than players fail organizations. Like literally place the blame elsewhere and then demonstrate that the blame was elsewhere by actually fixing him myself. And it's pretty incredible. I mean, Kevin O'Connell, I think, deserves an absolute ton of credit. I think he genuinely changed the way Kirk Cousins plays the game while he was the quarterback of the Vikings. I think he's done the same thing with Sam Darnold. Like he has resuscitated his career and demonstrated that he was that top pick for a reason, and that is still in there, even if it didn't work out with the Jets, it didn't work out with the Panthers.
Is it just me, or because maybe we lose things in history and kind of forget about stuff, but I feel like supporting casts are impacting quarterbacks more than ever. Maybe because defenses are so complicated, maybe because a lot of the quarterbacks aren't that different from each other in terms of like maybe in the 90s or something, the gap between the really good quarterbacks and the average quarterbacks was enormous. But now it might be only this much.
Yeah.
Someone's difference between being a backup level versus a star if they have that amount of talent. And where it all ties into Kevin O'Connell is he has the receiving options to be able to do whatever he wants to do. And so then when he's creating this confident quarterback who can work with his feet and eyes and throw to spaces and things like that, which every quarterback wants to be able to do, someone's got to be there to go catch the football. And for them to draft Jordan Addison is a huge move in the why is Sam Darnold succeeded. And to trade a draft pick for TJ Hawkinson, where I've seen Darnold become a different quarterback even from the first couple weeks because he has TJ Hawkinson. I think this is just everything coming together all at
Yeah.
once for O'Connell to be able to use those weapons, because if he has Irv Smith Jr. or something at tight end and not TJ Hawkinson, it's probably a little bit of a different story.
I think it definitely is. And this is why these things are always, multi-layered, right? There's always multiple things involved in all this. I think you're right. Like Kevin O'Connell has done a fantastic job, but if you took Kevin O'Connell and placed him on one of the worst rosters in the NFL and said, "Okay, do the same job." Does it work the same way? Almost certainly not, right? You require that level of talent to be able to do something like this as well. I think the point you made in terms of the supporting cast has become a bigger part of the puzzle because I think the quarterback landscape has leveled a little bit. I think, people still complain about bad quarterback play, but I think there have never been more capable starting NFL quarterbacks than there are right now. Like you only need to go back a decade or 15 years or whatever, where you needed to pay Alex Smith $100 million a year, because if the risk of not having him, and Alex Smith, like, okay, he was a former number one overall pick, but like his career, even at his best, he was like average, right? Like average became became worth $100 million a year because the threat of not having average meant that you had to put Brody Croyle out there, and it's like this doesn't, like, we can't play football like this. And there was only 15 guys that were like that, and everyone else was dealing with their version of Brody Croyle and trying to make something work with nothing. Now, like you've got, okay, this week you're going to have a game between Mason Rudolph and Mac Jones, each of whom are clear backups at this point, but both of whom are functional. Like they both work. They can both play offense. They can both make it, make an offense exist and function and put up 300 yards in a random game and 3 touchdowns or whatever. They're both functional NFL quarterbacks. That I think is maybe unprecedented. I'm not sure that's ever happened. So the gap between the best quarterbacks in the NFL and the worst starting quarterbacks is so much narrower than it was, 15 years ago. So I think now you're right. One of the big differentiators becomes who's throwing to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins as opposed to, a team that doesn't have any receiving help. And that starts to become a big separator. I suspect the way defenses have changed in the last 15 years is also a part of it. But yeah, it's all a big part. And Darnold being able to throw to Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison is obviously a huge part of his success as well. There's also the point that Steve keeps bringing up, which is we're now 4 or 5 years deep into every time Jordan Addison plays football, the quarterback that he's playing with is the best quarterback in the nation or the NFL. He might simply be the most powerful force in football at the moment.
No, you're right. Kenny Pickett was drafted in the first round because of Jordan Addison, and I did a story about one of Pickett's biggest games when Addison came out in the draft, where Addison just took over the entire game, every contested catch, every opportunity, and he's done that here, and he's also kept the nose clean since he has been back inside the facility. No other issues from him with the driving and so forth, but when he's on the field, he has made contested catches. He gets open versus man coverage. He is a 1B to Justin Jefferson, which is how they dreamed it up. What you're talking about, though, I think that the separator starts to become what can you do when everything goes wrong? And this is where I've been most impressed with Sam Darnold, especially in recent weeks, because I think there's a lot of quarterbacks who can read a zone defense and throw it to the tight end open in the zone and complete passes and move the ball. And if someone's one-on-one, they can throw it up to him and see if they can make a play. But what most quarterbacks can't do is when the rush comes and they're dodging tacklers and they're stepping up in the pocket and Jefferson's 40 yards down the field, throwing an anticipation ball to him. froze the film when Darnold made the decision to throw the ball. Jefferson's at like the 25-yard line. He catches it at the 3. I mean, it just, being able to do that, stuff like that. I think that's what puts quarterbacks in a different category, which of course has to lead to the question, because I need your thought and opinion on what they should do here with this situation. I have been sold on the idea of bringing Sam Darnold back in whatever capacity, whatever button they need to take or to push. And then you can still have a Jordan Love situation with JJ McCarthy and move on
Right.
if it doesn't work out. But that extra level of playmaking to me from Sam Darnold, and the fact that he's limited his number of turnovers, to me says you can win consistently with someone like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly that's the case if he maintains this kind of level. I think that sort of latently down stuff, it's just become not necessarily a necessity, but it's become the thing that separates almost all great quarterbacks, right? Like Lamar Jackson, the touchdown he had yesterday, where he just bought like 7 more seconds until eventually Isaiah Likely made the right adjustment and got himself open in the back of the end zone. Lamar puts the ball like he's buying time like it's a high school game against Danielle Hunter, like one of the most athletic defensive end pass rushers in football. And Lamar Jackson is acting like this is a high school game where I'm just a better athlete than you. I'm going to take all the time I need until my guy eventually uncovers. Now, okay, most people aren't Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, these are all guys that are able to extend the play and make those late in the down adjustment plays. And like, it's funny because every month or so, Kurt Warner fires off a tweet about how pocket passing is still the most important thing in the game. And in Kurt's eyes, every quarterback should play the game like Kirk Cousins or like Kurt Warner does or did. And it's like, okay, but almost nobody does that anymore. Like it's still obviously if you have Tom Brady, you can still do it, and it's still a theoretical way of winning the game. But like, who is doing that now? I mean, even Justin Herbert is maybe the most prototypical pocket passer, and he's super athletic and makes plays on the run. And there's almost nobody anymore that does that. So if you don't have a guy that can succeed late in the down, and that's a big difference between, Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. Like Darnold could do that stuff. Cousins can't. Cousins is a statue, even before he got his Achilles popped. And now he's absolutely a statue who can't move at all. So having that guy is almost a prerequisite at this point, unless you find a Tom Brady from somewhere. And there doesn't appear to be any on the horizon. So it's a hugely important thing. Like you need a guy that can make those plays. Otherwise, you're capped. You're at that level where we will take you as far as the offense takes you, and when the offense runs out of answers, you run out of answers because you're not Tom Brady. You're just a pretty good quarterback who can't make the plays off script and late in the down. So, I think a big variable is A, obviously the recovery of JJ McCarthy, but B, like where they think he is, which probably has changed. So this is the thing, right? We didn't think that was a particularly great draft class for quarterbacks. Obviously a ton of them went in the draft and went early, but all of a sudden, all of them look good. Like Caleb Williams, okay, number one overall, he's maybe struggled the most, but Jaden Daniels is a superstar already. Drake May looks phenomenal and has zero help. Like the worst offensive line in the league, the worst receiving core in the league, and he still looks pretty good. Michael Penix Jr. just unseated Kirk Cousins. Bo Nix was threatening rookie of the year for a period. The other five all look pretty useful, and JJ McCarthy was seen by some as, QB3, QB4, certainly in that group, right? Not like an outlier or the last of the group. So if that represents a baseline for him, like he could be somewhere in the middle of this group of rookie quarterbacks who are all pretty good, then it's a lot easier to say, yeah, we could turn the ball over to him and be good. But if they don't have that confidence, if he's a normal quote unquote rookie young quarterback, well, then the potential drop off from this fringe MVP, all pro caliber Sam Darnold is huge. And that would be a huge risk to take. Obviously, the complicating factors are what kind of contract are you going to have to pay Sam Darnold based off this insane season? And, the dynamic of franchise tag, trade, compensatory draft pick, like what will you get if you just let him walk out the door? These are all variables that all need to get thrown into the hopper and decide what the best course is.
Yeah, the thing with JJ McCarthy is they couldn't have been more impressed with what they saw last year.
Right.
However, he took a grand total of, I think, 3 reps with the first team for the entire offseason. And then, yeah, I mean, he beat up the Las Vegas Raiders second and third team in preseason. It was great. Can't take anything away from that, but that's a lot different than having a Pro Bowl caliber season with 13, 14, or 15 wins where you're the reason that's driving the offense. It's not
Yeah.
like a Case Keenum, oh, they had the number one defense and they just ran the football all the time. And then he had a few balloons in the air fall into people's hands. This has really been the quarterback driving the success this way. And I just think that, I mean, you come from the ultimate analytics guy background at PFF, but one of the concepts that was the drum that got banged was cheap quarterbacks and the advantage there, and I believe in it, and I don't disagree with it. But I also think that it can be overstated in a small window. Like the amount of levers to pull for the salary cap are just so immense in the NFL that anyone can pry open a window and make plays in this offseason, even if you pay Darnold. And it's just not a crime. This is what the thing that we should really learn from Sam Darnold. It's just not a crime if a quarterback actually gets to develop. That's what I
Yeah.
think about JJ McCarthy. If he has to wait for a couple of years, it's fine. Look who the Vikings are playing this week. Oh my gosh, if Jordan Love only has 1 year of his rookie contract, their franchise will just fall into the ocean. Well, not really, because they're a Super Bowl contender here. So, I just think that it's okay if they slow play this a little bit more rather than taking the risk of turning over a 13, 14, or 15 win team over to someone who's never played before.
Like it's clearly a massive sort of cheat code from a roster construction standpoint to have a really good quarterback on a rookie contract. But the most important thing is having really good quarterback play. Like even just this division, you've got Jared Goff, who was on a big money contract that became quite cheap just by the amount of time that's passed since he signed it. He's then re-upped for another contract, and the Lions still have one of the best rosters in the NFL. So it's clearly not a crippling handicap on your ability to construct a good roster. You've got Jordan Love, who got the deal after his sort of weird, unusual succession path road that the Packers have done. You've got Minnesota with the Sam Darnold cheap throwaway 1 year $10 million thing. And then meanwhile, Brock Purdy remains still on literally the best value quarterback or best value contract in football, right? The very last pick of the draft, who had been playing up until this point very, very good football. We can debate elite or not, but like very high level football, which makes that the single greatest advantageous contract from a salary cap standpoint in the game. Like better than if he'd been an undrafted free agent, they would be paying him more money then. So and then the 49ers are on their way. They have 6 wins right now because Purdy in part, isn't playing as well as he played last season and the season before. So the most important thing is Purdy playing at that level, not the fact that he's getting paid $7 a year. Like that's the variable. So this is why, yeah, it's obviously worse if you have to go from Sam Darnold on 1 year, $10 million to now we got to pay him 45, 50, whatever it's going to be. Clearly that's worse, right? But it's more important that you would keep Sam Darnold if he's able to keep playing at this level than run the risk of going to JJ McCarthy and that being a big drop off. And just to give you an indication of how risky it is to sort of put all your eggs in the basket of like preseason performance, I thought that Dorian Thompson Robinson was a terrible prospect as a quarterback. Didn't like him. Saw him in college a lot. Didn't think there was any chance whatsoever that that guy panned out into a quarterback at any kind of viable level at the NFL. He had an amazing preseason for the Browns, and people were like, "Look, everyone wrote him off. He's got a ton of experience. He got better every year, and now he looks like a star." And I was worried. I was like, "Wow, this guy legitimately looks good in preseason. I must have got this wrong, along with a bunch of other people." And then Mike Clay had a tweet today that DTR has 697 yards and 180 career pass attempts. That 3.9 or 3.9 yards per attempt is the worst in NFL history. The next closest is some guy called Kim McQuilkin at 4.2 yards. So after that preseason, everyone was like writing apology letters and saying DTR is going to be the next guy to come from the middle of the draft. You guys all wrote him off. And yet he's actually statistically the worst quarterback that's ever played the game. So that's the risk, right? Is that, yeah, JJ McCarthy looked really good in a limited preseason action against largely second teams. He might do that in the NFL. He might completely turn that seamlessly, like Dak Prescott did, right? Looked great in preseason, became the quarterback, was clearly the right guy, carried it into the regular season. It might happen, or he might be the next DTR. And if that's the case, it's a catastrophe if you move on from Sam Darnold and he then goes and lights it up for the Raiders, and he's the solution in Las Vegas, and you turned it over to the rookie who actually isn't as good as he looked in preseason.
Right. If this had been an 8-win team, then the risk wouldn't be much. When it's a
Right.
13, 14, or 15-win team, then the risk is enormous of falling off the face of the earth and taking a team that was just deep into the playoffs or at the top of the conference and then sliding backwards with that veteran team. The other thing is, too, the Vikings aren't young. They're a very much win now roster. I think that they have the lowest percentage of rookie contract snaps of any team in the NFL. This is a team that really was built to win very soon. Maybe not necessarily this year, but it was really built to win in 2025 and then popped before that because of how well Sam Darnold played. So there is a huge risk in that idea, and they better be unbelievably sure. And not only that, but he's missed an entire year of throwing footballs, which is the thing that he was needing to improve the most, is just his accuracy and consistency throwing the ball. But he's not able to do that with the footwork for 6 months out of this year that's setting him back. So I think there's a lot of factors that kind of point toward that. I just pulled it up, by the way. I was curious, like, what Jordan Love's cap hit was for this year. It's 20 million. Like, these contracts, not the cap isn't fake, but you can certainly fake it with the contracts for a window of time if you need to, which they could with Sam Darnold if they need to. So,
and critically,
go ahead.
the more the Vikings win down this stretch, like if they win the next 2 games, if they get the number 1 seed, if they make it deep into the playoffs, like the more they win between now and the end of the season, the bigger a call it would be to walk away from him, because you're demonstrating more and more conclusively that him in this environment is capable of winning a Super Bowl, right? And doing it on at the head of a really good roster. So every win from now on makes it harder, I think, to justify walking away from that. And you're right, like let's say Darnold, whatever contract he gets given, it's probably not going to be like the top of the market contract, right? It's not going to be the Dak Prescott market resetting deal. So it's almost like it's unlikely to be the most prohibitive cap situation in the NFL, even if you add his deal to JJ McCarthy's deal and take them as a unit, right? If you take whatever contract you're giving him and McCarthy's contract and put them together, it's probably not amongst the most money being given to quarterbacks in football, which again just makes it easier to do.
So I think I have a general theory about this, about like roster building and everything else, because people love the draft and people always want the draft picks to be the guy. But sometimes it's a random player like Adam Thielen being better than Laquan Treadwell. And my thought is always, I don't really care where he came from and how you got him. I just need him to play great. And that's the case with, they didn't draft Kyle Hamilton, but that left the door open for Josh Metellus. It's like, well, you got the guy you needed in that position. I don't care if you drafted him or not. And it's kind of like that with Sam Darnold. Like, all we were ever talking about with Kirk Cousins was it's just not good enough. It's just not to the level. This is to the level, as has been proven throughout the season. Now they're facing the Green Bay Packers, sir. How good are the Green Bay Packers? And let me preface this by saying, one of the funny things that's played out in the NFL is that there is a very clear group of really good teams, and then a little bit small group of and then just crap everywhere. And so if you go through everyone's schedule, you're like, they didn't play anybody. Who have they beaten? That it feels that way for the Vikings a little bit. It certainly feels that way for the Packers, where I'm looking like, when was the last good team they played? Oh yeah, they lost to the Vikings, they lost to the Lions, they lost to the Lions again, and no one else is any good. But if their Green Bay podcasts are doing the same thing, they're like, who have the Vikings beaten, huh? So it's kind of a hard thing to compare these teams when you don't have too many recent elite versus elite matchups. So how good are they really?
Well, that's the thing. You can look at that sort of data point two different ways, right? You can look at it and say, the only teams that they've played that are any good, they lost to. You can also look at it and say the only teams they're undefeated if they haven't played number one seed contending football teams, right? Literally the only teams that have beaten them this season are all still in the hunt for that number one seed in the NFC. And outside of that, they're an undefeated football team, despite losing their quarterback for a couple of games and having to do it with a backup. That's really impressive. And I think they're a better team now than they were earlier in the season for a lot of those games. So I think the bottom line is very good. That game, okay, it was against a New Orleans team that was banged up with Spencer Rattler quarterback, but they murdered them. I mean, that was the first shutout of the season. They were great on both sides of the ball. They can run the ball, they can pass the ball. You don't know where the passes are going to because everybody is pretty useful. They can spread the ball around. One day it's going to be Jaden Reed. One day it's going to be Christian Watson, Tucker Kraft. The ball can go anywhere. Jordan Love is reaching that stage where I don't think it's quite the utterly untouchable level it was for a while late last season, but he's getting there. Like he's putting performances like that together. And the defense is so much better than it was a year ago. I think that's a big factor in this as well. So, yeah, it's a fair point that they haven't had the toughest schedule in the world and the best teams that they've played, they have lost to. But I do think that right now this Packers team is playing as well as anybody. It's just unfortunate that they're in a division where that's true for three teams.
Well, I think similarly to the Vikings. So the Vikings' 2 losses came against really good teams and by a grand total of 12 points. And when you look at Green Bay's losses, yeah, they were down to the Vikings, but at the end of the day, it's not a terrible loss for them. And then their losses to Detroit, well, the most decided one was to Detroit in the weather, but most recently, they really should have won that game against Detroit. So they've been playing really close games as well, just like the Vikings, and then blowing out a couple of bad teams. Where I see the biggest difference between Green Bay now and how I would talk about them in the past is their defensive scheme. Because in the past, one thing you could say was, hey, they've got Kenny Clark. He's going to eat Garrett Bradbury. We know that. That's going to be a problem. However, they are somehow going to end up with Quay Walker on Justin Jefferson, and that'll be fine. I haven't seen too much of that this year. They are in a different place defensively. And when I look at their pass rush grades, they have a lot of different, it's almost like they're receivers. Like they have a lot of different people contributing and they don't rely on just one person, which I think makes them even a little bit more dangerous.
Yeah, they can get pressure from everywhere. I think you're right. They're still going to have an advantage against Garrett Bradbury. And that's the one area of the Vikings where a bit like Seattle, it's like it's the one Achilles heel to the team. It's like this is a really good team, top to bottom. But every now and again, you're going to run. Okay, he's not this year, but you're going to run into a Dexter Lawrence, right? And he's just going to destroy your center for the entire game. And if you don't have a workaround to that, like Garrett Bradbury, I think he's given up 33, 34 pressures this season, which is a huge number for a center. Like that's twice the volume you would want your center to be giving up over the course of the year. You're going to run into teams that can exploit that. And Green Bay is probably one of them. But now they're so much more diverse than that from a pass rushing standpoint. They can get pressure from everywhere. And it's a really formidable unit. And Quay Walker is suddenly giving way to an Edgerrin Cooper who looks phenomenal. I mean, young, but that dude is incredible. And for some reason, they've been kind of holding him back and slow playing his push into the lineup. But that guy's fast. He can cover. He can blitz. He can do everything. And he doesn't make as many mistakes as somebody like Quay Walker. So they're actually getting better with the personnel moves that they're making on defense. I think that's a big difference between this group now in 2024 going into 2025 on last year's team. Like their defense is so much better.
And you could see too that teams that have an attack into the middle have caused the most problems for the Vikings. Teams that blitz up the middle, like Arizona did a bunch of times, or teams that have good defensive tackles, like the Seattle Seahawks, caused them the most problems. You know, Bradbury, this sort of always happens. He had a run there where if you're looking at the PFF numbers, he was up into the middle of the league in pass protection just a couple weeks ago. And you're like, oh, okay, well, you know, he's been pretty solid. And then the last few weeks, it has really gone downhill. And it's almost always, who was he playing? Oh, Grady Jarrett came to town. Uh-oh. Oh, it was Leonard Williams and Jaron Reed. And uh-oh. And that's exactly what they might be in for here with a team that has a good defensive tackle. It's always a factor that they'll have to work around. So give me like why don't we do like an old school, what's your 3 keys to the game, Monson? And if you want to do it in a very yelly fashion, because you guys do a segment about the yelly show, you could do that too if you like.
My consignment of Shouty Show merch just arrived. I could have put it on for this. Um, yeah, look, I think one big thing really is how much of a factor is Garrett Bradbury in this game. Like, and not just him, like the interior as a whole. We're singling out Bradbury because he is the weakest link, I think, from that point of view. But the interior as a unit remains relatively suspect compared with the rest of that team. So, how much of a factor is that? Like, can they stop that being a consistent problem? And against Seattle, it wasn't a problem all game. Like late in the game, it became a problem, and they were able to overcome it with the face mask penalty and then the touchdown. But like, I think he had 8 dropbacks, something like that, in the fourth quarter, and 5 of them he was under pressure. Like it became a real factor late in the game. So, how big a factor is that in this game? The Justin Jefferson, like I think they're getting Jair Alexander back for this game. I think they've been kind of working him towards this as the return. We're going to need you against Justin Jefferson and the Vikings. That matchup has gone a couple of different ways, with Jefferson and the Packers. Where does that land? Are we going to get they actually keep him pretty quiet and they force somebody else to win, which can happen, but is obviously less ideal than just your best player taking over? Or does Jefferson just remind everybody that no, I'm the best receiver in the NFL and I'm going to go, I'm better than your number one guy that you're going to rush back to try and cover me in this game? And he goes off for 180 and 2 touchdowns. And, that's a big factor. And then look, it's always a cop out, but turnovers are the kind of thing that determines these games, right? We talk about this is why football is great and maddeningly frustrating all at the same time. Is you work out, the pluses and minuses, those big, comparison charts where you see who's got the edge in all these 15 different categories. And then it comes down to like, which way does the ball bounce when a crazy things happens in the first quarter, right? Does this team like these massive high leverage 14-point swing plays that like we're talking about these games that have betting lines of like 2.5, 1.5, whatever. Those plays individually are 14-point swings if it bounces your way or the other way. There's no way of getting away from those. Like if you get 1 or 2 of those go your way, you win the game. If you get 1 or 2 of them go their way, they win the game. And it sucks that that's the way these things are determined, but it's sadly true.
Do you steal the ball away from Jordan Love? They did it a couple of times last time. Vikings are number 1 in the league in interceptions, and a lot of that is caused by pressure. It's making plays on the football. Some of it is just like Theo Jackson said, I was as surprised as you guys after he picked off the pass from Geno Smith. Does the quarterback just do something crazy or make a big mistake? And in this game where you have 2 big arm quarterbacks who like to push the ball downfield and are also prone to the occasional overconfidence in the cannon, that is a great factor. It wasn't as shouty as it could have been for you for the Shouty Show segment, but people can check the mic for that terrific segment. Sam Monson, always the best to have you on. It's got to be fun for you, man. I know that as you go along in your career and you've covered all the teams all the time, you get farther away from that Vikings fandom of yours from the Randy Moss era, but there's got to be a little twinkle in the eye this week when you have this kind of game, right?
Oh, definitely. It's still cool. And look, if the Vikings win a Super Bowl, I'm going to be as happy as anybody about it. I'm absolutely rooting for that. I'm also, experienced and damaged enough as a fan that I'm not buying it until it happens. Like I am still waiting for the wheels to fall off this thing, right up until they don't, and they get over the line.
And that right there is the proof that you've been following it for as long as you have. Sam, once again, going into this playoffs and everything else, Check the Mic, a must listen for all. So I appreciate your time. Make sure you check that out. And we'll talk to you again soon, man. Maybe before the parade, possibly.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.